Begin the current Daf Mesechta Succah Daf Lamed. Begin on the bottom of the Gimel Mabeis, 8 lines up from the bottom of the Yamid, where we continue with the theme of this parak of Lulav Agazel, which we're talking about the different validations and invalidations of the Daled Minim, and we continue with that of the Arava of the willow. Shiur Kospas Bakazach and Cheskel turn to the Chaim. We appreciate everyone who's joining us for today's Daf. Something to discuss in today's Daf are details about the Arava, which is one of the Daled Minim, its specific laws. Words that have changed meanings over time. How many of each species is required? We know with the Daled Minim how much of each one. May their tips be clipped, what's known as Niktem Reisha. And finally, what kind of ester can be used. So the concept we're discussing today's daf are ester netias. It's halacha Moshe Messina regarding if it's 10 trees that are planted in a certain area of Beis Hasayim, that then you can go ahead and plant it and tend to the field even right up until the Shemitah year itself, which although generally we have to go a little bit earlier, but by 10 trees you're allowed to go up until that of Rosh Hashanah. Beis HaKaisis is the reticulum. It's one of the stomachs of the ruminants of an animal. Treifa is halacha that if it has a mortal defect, even if you slaughter it, it's not going to be kosher. Gittin is regarding the halachas of when you have to divorce a woman. So generally the one who the agent delivers it has to say b'fanei nechtem, but when it's from Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, then they don't have to say b'fanei nechtem. Arla is the halacha of the fruits in its first 3 years are forbidden to consume and have pleasure from. Truma is the first around 1/50th of the produce that's separated and give it to the kohen. Demai is that when you buy from the Amaretz from ignoramus, you're not really sure if he took off his meisters, so then out of doubt the Rabbanan said you have to take it off. Meister Sheni is the halacha of the second tithe, which after you take off your trumas and meisters, the first tithe, then you take the second one and you eat that in Yerushalayim, or you redeem it and you eat that value in Yerushalayim. So begin the current Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, 8 lines up in the bottom of the Amud. We continue with the halacha of the next Mishnah. Arava Gezula, a stolen Arava. Let's say somebody was selling on 13th Avenue and you just steal the Arava, and now you have Aravas for Yom Tov. That's going to be invalid because, as we had mentioned already, Lekachtem Lachem is going on all the Daled Minim, it has to be yours, and hence, if it's stolen and not yours, it's going to be invalid. Also, V'yevesha, if let's say it's a dried out Arava, it's totally whitened, then Psula is going to be invalid. And that's because it has to be hadr, it has to be beautiful, and if it's dried out, it's not valid. Shalashera v'shalir on the dachas. If let's say it's from an ashera tree, which is a tree that was worshipped as a avodah zarah, or from a city that was totally the whole town did avodah zarah and they have to be burnt. So psula, and the reason is because since that is going to be burnt, because you have to burn everything in that city, so it's like it's pulverized. It's like ashes already, and therefore it doesn't have the minimum measurement of 3 tvachim that a rava has to be. Let's say niktim reishai. Let's say the top of the hada of the arava got cut off. Or let's say nifritzu aleha, or if let's say its leaves fell off, or vatzavtzafa. Tzavtzafa is a type of a willow where its leaves are round, as the Gemara is going to say later on, which is invalidated as we learn that from Sukkim, and therefore psula, it's not a kosher type of arava, it's going to be pasul. Kamusha, if it's withered, or vishanashra miktas aleha, only let's say some of the leaves fell off, or vishal bal, let's say it grows in the field, not by the brook, not by the stream. The Gemara is going to learn now that it's going to be kosher. The word Baal, why is it called Baal? Generally means like a husband. It means land that you don't have to water because it's enough with the rain from the sky. Because Baal means to say like a lashon of Bayel, which is that of the settling of the it's like the relationship that the sky has with the earth, of that it rains and it emanates it. So that's going to be ksheir, it's going to be kosher. Rashi points out an interesting thing that why is it that we find that we have 4 separate mishnayos to say almost the same halachas of the Daled Minim. We said these halachas of Gzula and Yavish, we said already by Lulav and Rava and Hadas, and we're going to say by Estrik too. The reason for that is because each one of these cases have something distinct that's not by the other one. For example, Tzini Hara Barzel, which is a unique halacha regarding Lulavim, that they have very small branches, and therefore you have to say that it's going to be kosher that as long as it reaches the bottom of the other one. And so too, when you have more berries than the leaves, that's only something that applies to Hadassah by myrtles. Tzafzafa, which is the halacha over here, is only applicable by Arava, by willows, that it looks similar to Aravas, but they're not the same. Arula and Truma, as we'll see in the following Mishnah, is only applicable by Estrik, and therefore we say it 4 different times, although many of the halachas are the same, but since they all have their distinct halachas, therefore we mention them as independent Mishnahs. Now, when the Brisa elaborates on these halachas of our Mishnah of the Aravis, it says in the pasuk when it says you should take for yourself on the first day the Priyat Hadar, Kabis Tamarim, Anafet Sabas, and the Arvei Nachal. So, what is Arvei Nachal? What are the willows of the brook? Says the Brisa, Hagidil Mal Nachal. It means to say that it grows by a brook of water, and that's the mitzvah. Now, as Rashi points out, if it doesn't grow by the brook, which is the halacha, it's going to be kosher, because we learn that ultimately from the plural word arve, which is not, it doesn't say arav nachal, it says arve nachal. The plural comes to include other types of aravas, but initially you want to go ahead and have, and it's brought in halacha, that possibly that you want to have it that grows by the brook. Now, davach, another interpretation in that is that arve nachal, what does it mean, the willows of the brook? We're talking about that its leaves are elongated like that of a brook, meaning it's a stream that runs long and narrow and not round, which is excluding tzavtzava, because tzavtzava is actually a type of arava that's round. And therefore, this is what's qualifying and telling us there should be aravas and not to be tzavtzava. Another brisa that says arvi nachal, the willows of the brook. I would only know that you could only take aravis, you got to live and get somewhere by the waters. Shalbal, but if it grows in the field, that grows from the rain, or shalharim, that which is in the mountains. Now, it means to say that the aravis that are by the mountains, not tzavtzava, which generally grows by the mountains, as we'll see later on. But if you have aravis from the mountains, benign, how do you know that that's going to be valid too, even though it doesn't grow by the water? That says, mikal makom, it says in plural, arve, to tell you no matter what type it is, even if it's not that which specifically grows by the water, it's still going to be valid. Now, as you can see on top of Lamadalam and Al, Rabbi Shloimy, he says that arve, that the pasuk says in the plural, is not coming to validate if it grows by the fields. No, it's actually coming to teach something else. It's coming to tell you that shtayim, there's two mitzvahs of arava. What's the two mitzvahs of arava? Achas, one is to bind it together with lululav in the lulav. Achas lamikdash. And the other mitzvah of arava, a very different mitzvah, is that it would go around, which was where the arminig of hakafas of the lulav comes from. They would go around the mizbeach, as the Gemara says later on from Haim and Aleph, and they would go around with our arava, which we do by Hishan the Rabbah. We do, but that's what they would go around with. That's what they need the arava for. Now, then says the Gemara of Rabbanan, the Rabbanan who they expound arve, the plural, to validate that it's even if it's not growing by the stream, but even if it grows in the field or by the mountains. So lemikdash minalahu, where do they know this halacha that you take the aravas around the mizbeach? Abishol knows it because of the plural. But according to Rabbanan, that the plural is coming to teach you something else. So where do they know this halacha that you have a different halacha of aravas going around the mizbeach? Says the Gemara, they know this from a halacha Moshe Sinai. Eser netiyos. So what's this halacha of 10 saplings? So actually Rashi has a great length about this. It's a Mishnah in Seder Zorim, in Masechta Shvius. If you have 10 saplings that are spread out through an area of a base saw, where each one has there's the same amount that you have between each and every tree, and it takes up exactly a base saw, which is 50 by 50 amma, that's scattered throughout its length and its width. So then the halacha is you're allowed to plow that whole base saw because of those 10 saplings, right before the Shemitah year, like this year, up until Rosh Hashanah. Now, even though there's a mitzvah min HaTorah to add on what's called Mechol Al HaKodesh, to add on Shemitah laws even before the Shemitah year actually starts, we learn that from a pasuk that says B'charish B'katzah Tishbais. Why tell me that on Shemitah you're not supposed to plow and harvest? It's no different than all the other malachas. No, it actually means that the plowing of Erev Shvius that's going into the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to plow 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, as the Gemara says in the first Sukkah Yomay Cut of Gimel Beis. We learn that from Sukkah. Now, but regarding netiyos, regarding saplings, there's a halacha Moshe Sinai that you're allowed to plow beneath those saplings, which are young trees, up until Rosh Hashanah, so that they don't dry out. Now, if there's 10 of them and they're scattered halachically in a base saw, then it was said to Moshe that then those 10 trees are nourishing from the whole base saw, and then you're allowed to plow the whole base saw because of them. Now, but let's say that you don't have 10, or let's say they're not scattered halachically exactly the same amount between each tree. So then you're only allowed to plow beneath each tree according to the amount that it nourishes, according to the calculation how you would do the proportion of 10 according to base saw. Now, this is only by saplings, but by old trees, then 30 days before Rosh Hashanah it is forbidden, as is brought in Masechta Moed Cotton, which according to Rabbi Shloimy know from Moshe Sinai, according to Rabbi Kivi know from Sukkim. The Chacham, however, they made a siyag, they made a fence to make it forbidden, let's say by a grain field, it's usher all the way from Pesach, and by a stay ilim, by an orchard, by old trees, it's forbidden even earlier. It's forbidden already from Shavuos, meaning earlier than 30 days before. The reason why they called it old trees is because they actually they nourish a lot, and therefore 3 trees for a base saw is already combining, and you'd be able to plow the whole base saw again only up until Shavuos, because that whole area is necessary, because it leaves the category of being considered as a grain field and being considered orchard if you have 3 trees. But if you don't have 3 trees, then you're allowed to plow only beneath each one accordingly, proportionally up until Shavuos, and the rest is also already from Pesach. So this halacha that we just mentioned of Es Natiyas is a halacha Moshe Sinai. What's another one? Is the one we're discussing here in our sugya. Arava, using the aravas in the Beis Hamikdash, meaning not the arava that used for the lulav, because that wouldn't be halacha Moshe Sinai. That we know from a pasuk, Arvei Nachal. The halacha of aravas being used to go around the Mizbeach, that's also halacha Moshe Sinai. And v'nitzach hamayim. The halacha is that when they would bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, the 7 days of Sukkot, the Gemara says later on of Mechesim and Aleph, that they would do a nisach, a libation of water, where generally all year round the libations, what's called the nisachim, were only from yain, wine, except on Sukkot, where then they would, by the Tamid Shel Shachar, they would have 2 nisachim, one of the general yain and also that of water. So these 3 were all 3 mentioned in the Beis HaMedrash. How do you know the halacha? And they responded, halacha Moshe Sinai. It's halacha that was an oral tradition from Moshe from Sinai. As Rashi just points out, the one who heard it, he put it together in one order. But the truth is, these are not the only 3 halachas of Moshe from Sinai. The Gemara already told us on Daf Yomi Beis that shiur in measurements, chatzitzin, which are interposition, and mechitzas, also the one who heard it also put it together. But really, it's not only those. There's many halachas Moshe Sinai. It's just the one who heard it, he put it together. When he went and he heard in the shiur, he put it. But really, it's many halachas Moshe Sinai. Again, that's where the Rabbanan would know that you do these hakafas with darava, not from the pasuk, because they use arvei the plural to teach you shalbal if it's a regular field and not by the brook. And rather the halacha of Aravis that we do in the Shana Rabbah, let's say, which commemorates that in Mizbeach, is halacha Moshe Sinai, which we don't do. Ours is a minig, but that's where it stems from. As I'm in the Brisa, continuing on this Arvei Nachal. It says in the pasuk, you take the willows of the brook, which means Hagadelas al Nachal. It's a qualifying the type of species that grows by the brook. Prat l'tzavtzava, that's coming to exclude a certain type of species called tzavtzava. Hagdela ben harm, which generally grows amongst the mountains. Which Amram Zeir says, Mikra, says, what's the pasuk that you see that tzavtzava is more inferior and therefore it's not a type of willow that, because if it was a type of willow, then at least we should include it from arvei. You told me arvei is plural to include all types of arabas, so maybe tzavtzava should be included. How do you know that? No, it's inferior, it's not really a type of araba. Because it says a pasuk in Yechezkel, when Hashem was rebuking the Jewish people, it says, Kach hamayim rabim, take the ones that grow on many waters, tzavtzava samai, and they're made like tzavtzava, which as Rebbe Vo is going to shortly explain, we're talking about those that are rooted and they by many waters, they became like the tzavtzava, which is in something a flaw, inferior, because it's rebuking, Yechezkel is rebuking them. Which Amalei Abai, first Abai he asks, he says, how do you know that tzavtzava is different than which one grows amayim rabim, which is aravis? But v'dima perusha kamefarish, maybe it's explaining. Kach amayim rabim, take the ones that grow by multiple waters, which are the aravis, which are arvei nachal. Umayim, what is it? Tzavtzava. It's explaining that it's a type of tzavtzava. Says the Gemara, no, you can't say that, because if that would be the case, then my samai. Then what would it mean that you're making it? It sounds like that you're transferring, you're downgrading that which is usually amayim rabim, which are the rabbis, and you're making it into that of tzavtzava. As the Gemara brings the mashal, I'm a bravo. My Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Ani amarti, I said, She Yisrael Lafanai, that the Jewish people shall be in front of me. Kakach hamayim rabim, like the species that grows on the multitude of waters, or anything that grows on multiple waters. Like we say in the first parak in Tehillim, right? That grows that on waters, it's going to flourish. And that's what I wanted the Jewish people to be. Well, my new, what is that? Arava. What did they make themselves? Like the tzavza, which looks like aravis, but it's different, and it grows on the mountains, and therefore, like we see that the Rebbe Voz explained, the pasuk is saying the tzavza is more inferior. It's not the same type as aravas, and therefore it's not going to be valid. And that's what arvei nachal is coming to exclude. Has to be the species that grow. Again, it doesn't have to actually grow by the brook. It has to be the species that does, which is aravas, and not like tzavza, which generally grows on the mountain. Now, those who learned this as the Mishnah itself telling us this halacha. I mean, it wasn't Reb Zera. And the question that Abaya asked was actually Reb Zera, and the answer of if so, my samai was actually said without any person, meaning it's really the same thing. Just we're adding it's a step earlier. When the Bryce says Kachamayim Rab and Tzavtzav Shmai, that the Bryce itself mentioned the pasuk that you see that Tzavtzav is inferior. It's not the same thing in Mayim Rab. I'm asking Reb Zera. The first version had Abaya asking. Here it's Reb Zera asking it. Zera asks, maybe the pasuk is explaining, Kachamayim Rabim, take those which grow on the multi river waters, my new, what is that tzavtzava? That answers the Gemara. It doesn't say who it is. Then my summer would be that samai. It's not samai to make it into tzavtzava. It is tzavtzava. Obviously, it's a different one, and that's how we're saying that tzavtzava is not valid type of arava. As Amar Bavo, he says, Amar Kodesh Baruch Ani Amarti Sheyisrael Lafanik Kachamayim Rabim. I said the Jewish people should be in front of me like those who are on the multitude of waters. And my new, what is that arava? In some aspect, what do the Jewish people make themselves? They don't realize that what they're trading in is katzavtzava shabaham. They make themselves like tzavtzava of the mountains. So we continue with another brisa that elaborates Tanabanan that tells us what are the simonim of a harava. Is that harava? What's an harava? We said haravas are valid and tzavtzava is not valid. What are these two types? So harava, a willow. So first of all, kana shala adon. Its stem is red. Second of all, va'ala shala mashach. Its leaves are elongated. They're long and oval-like. Upia is the edge of its leaf. Is chalak, is smooth. It's not made ridged and jagged. Those are the three types of simonim of the aravas. Tzavtzafa, kana shala lavan. So its stem is actually white. Second of all, v'ala shala agel. Its leaves are round and not oval. Ufiya dimel. And third of all is that its mouth is similar to that of a sickle. So therefore, three differences you have between aravas and tzavtzafa, and therefore it's not valid. By that, as the Gemara, but Tanya will in the Brisa that actually doimel, if you have the leaves similar to that of a sickle, which are jagged, which are all facing one way towards the handle, that's how a sickle is, then kosher, it's going to be kosher. Doimel master, if it's similar to a saw is that you have these the edges that are coming out like that of a knife, then puzzle, it's going to be invalid. But one thing we see is that if it's similar to a magal, it is kosher. Didn't you just tell me that you have to have three signs of a arava, and there's three signs that's not valid of a tzavtzava, and one of the signs was demel magal is going to be invalid. But we have a brisa that says clearly that demel magal is going to be kosher. So the Gemara says, Abaye says, you're right. Kitanya hi, when did we say that's going to be kosher? Is bechilfa gila, is by the gila willow. It's a type of a arava that's kosher. Now, its edge is actually similar to that of a sickle, but all other aravas are smooth. So, Amabaya, he says, Shemamina, what you can infer from this is, Haichil Vagila is kosher l'shan. It's kosher l'shan, meaning to say, even though one of the three signs is actually not there, that's still going to be valid because it is a type of arava. So, even though we said that a way of identifying is with these three signs, but it doesn't have to have all three signs, and that's actually why it said the inverse. By tzavtzava, I already know the inverse. To tell you that it has to have all three not to be valid, but you could have two of them and still be valid. So, but the Gemara says this, that Abai says that obviously inferring that it's kosher v'shana for the arava, obviously that's what we're learning. Says the Gemara, no. So the Gemara says pshita, no. So the Gemara says, Madem, what would you say? The chilfa gila has a secondary name. It's not just called that of arava, it's chilfa gila. So I would say, lo in this kasha is not going to be valid. Kamash Malan, that's coming to tell you that no, it's going to be kosher. So the Gemara says, maybe you should say it's not valid, as we say oftentimes in halacha, that if it has a secondary name, it's not the purest element that the Torah is talking about. So the Gemara says, no, Arvi Nachal, the Torah says the willow of the brook. Mikal Makam, that doesn't say what type of a rava has to be. It could be any type, and therefore it's going to be valid. Now, Amar Rav Chizda related back to this teaching that we said regarding what is aravas. So Rav Chizda says the following idea. He says, Hani Talas Mili, these following three things, Ishtanu Shmayu Michar Beis HaMikdash. Their names were changed, not only changed, they were actually flipped from when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the first one is the one related to our sugya. Chalafta, which Rashi says it's not referring to Chilfa Gila, which is a valid type of arava. Rather, Chalafta is actually referring to Tzavtzafa. Tzavtzafa is the type of arava that we said is not valid. Now, after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, its name was actually changed, and they actually call it Arafta. The species that they call Aravas, says the Gemara, not the one that we call the right one aravas, but in Talmudic times, there was a species that they called a ravta. That was actually the one that used to be called tzavtzava, and it's actually not valid. And the ravta chalavta, the one that they used to call aravas, is the one they call now chalavta. And actually, so if you went in Talmudic times to the marketplace and you were looking for aravas, you would actually buy chalavta, because the one that used to be tzavtzava is arava, and the one was arava tzavtzava, so you would actually look for tzavtzava to get. So the Gemara says, what's the difference that they changed the name? So the Gemara lulav. The obvious difference is if you want to buy aravas for lulav, you would want to know which is the one that's called what. Another halacha that's also coming up is shipura. Regarding a shayfer which is bent, they changed its name to chatzaitzra, to chatzaitzras. Now chatzaitzrasa, that which used to be called a chatzaitzras, which is a flat and it's not from a ram, they ended up calling it shipura. They call it shayfer. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? What do I have to know that they changed the names? L'shayfer shel Rosh Hashanah. The shayfer Rosh Hashanah, they have to have a bent from a ram. So when you went in Talmudic time to the marketplace, you would actually ask for chatzaitzras. I need a chatzaitzras, because what used to be called a shayfer, they changed the chatzaitzras. What used to be called chatzaitzras, they changed the shayfer. Another halacha is pisarta. What used to be called pesarta, they called pesaira. And what used to be called pesaira, they called pesarta, which Rashi explains, one of them was a large table, one of them was a small table. Now they used to call the big one name, let's say pesaira, and then they changed it to pesarta, and then that which was small, they ended to change it to the big. So you must have mind, what do I have to know what they call a large table or a small table? So business dealings. If you tell a guy you're selling him a pesaira, you have to know what it is in common usage, what it is. So what used to be called one thing was ultimately changed to another one. Now, Amar Bayis, that was three things that Rav Chizah said. So Bayis says that Afan Yomi says, I'm also going to say, I also have another one that I found that they changed the name. Bei Kasi, or the common usage that it's usually called, it's called Beis HaKoises. The reticulum, there's 4 stomachs in a ruminant, in a kosher animal like a cow. At the end of the keres, which is the first stomach, called the paunch. So the second stomach, why is it called Beis HaKoises, which literally means say the room of the cups, is because it's actually made in the shape, if you look, it's made like goblets, like a cup. And therefore it's called Beis HaKoises, the room, the house of the cups. Now, the wall around this second stomach is thick, like 2 layers worth of wall. So that stomach, they ended up changing to call it Huvlalisa. Now, the Huvlalisa is actually what's called the hemsis, or the omasum, which is actually the third stomach. The fourth stomach is called the kavis, called the maw. So those are the 3 stomachs of the ruminant. Now, Huvlila, what used to be called Huvlila, which is the third stomach, they call it Beikasi. Now they call it which is really the second one. So the names of the second and the third stomachs were changed. So you have to. So you should know that. So the Gemara line what's different. What do I have to know? What the names of the stomach of the ruminant are? That it's changed. That whatever is now the third was really originally the second, and what was the second was the third. So the Gemara says no. There's an important halachic difference. If you find a needle in the thickness of the walls of the real Beis HaKoises, the real Beis HaKoises is again the one that's now called Hovlila. Hovlila is the third one, but now they call, for some reason, the third, what they're calling Hovlila is really Beis HaKoises, which is the second one. And what they're calling Beis HaKoises is actually Hovlila. Now, a Brisa teaches in Chulun Daf Nun Mebez, if you find a needle in the thickness of the walls of the Beis HaKoises, again, which is the second stomach, the reticulum, on one side, stuck into the thickness of the wall, and it doesn't go, you don't have it going what's called mafulish, it's not through and through, it's going to be kosher. Because the thickness of the wall clogs it up and it protects it. But if it's all the way through from both sides, then it's going to be treifa, because obviously it has a mortal defect that its stomach, the food's got a leaky gut. It's going to be spilling out. Now, that's what he's saying. The one that we call now Beis HaKoises, which is not the second stomach, which is actually the third stomach, which is actually the omasum, that actually does not make a difference. Because since its wall, the third stomach, is actually very thin, so that would make a psul even if it was on one side, because one side means to say it probably made it through the other side too. And again, that they used to call Hovlila, which is the Umasam, and then they changed the name. So again, it's important to know which stomach we're talking about, because the second stomach, then if it was only on one side, it would be kosher. But the third stomach, if it was only one side, we would say it's pasuk, because it's a very thin membrane. That's the difference between the second and third stomach. You've got to know which one we're referring to, and it's important to know that they changed the name from what it used to be before the Churban Beis Hamikdash. Then Amar Rabbi Yosef says, And I'll also say another thing that changed names after the Churban Beis Hamikdash. What used to be called Bavel, then they call now Borsiv. What they used to call Borsiv, they call now Bavel. Says the Gemara, Lamai, Nafkamina. Why do I have to know the difference? What they used to call? I'm not a history buff. I don't have to know what they had names that used to be called, or I'm not into geography. Says the Gemara, the halachic difference is Likitei Nashim, for divorce documents for women. The Gemara tells us in opening sugya in Gittin Daf Beis and Aleph, if someone brings a get from Chutz La'aretz, from out of Eretz Yisrael, so he has to say, B'fanei nechta, in front of me was written, in front of me was a sign. And the reason is either for two reasons, famous machlokes, and either because there is no witnesses that are around, because they're very far away, so you have to verify, because you're not going to verify if the husband claims this was a forgery, or because, no, out of Eretz, they're not proficient in the laws of writing a get lishma for the namesake of this woman, and you have to say that you saw it was written in and signed, and that you know it was written in namesake of these people. But if someone brings in Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't have to say for both of the reasons. A, because in Eretz Yisrael they're proficient in the laws of lishma, and also because everyone comes to Eretz Yisrael, the Oiler Regalim comes from all around, and they're going to recognize the signatures to validate it. Now the Gemara says in Gittin, Davav Mad Aleph, that Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael for the laws of Gittin. For both reasons. First of all, they're B'nai Torah, so they're became the laws of Lishma. And also, since the B'nai Yeshiva, it's not only here that they're hitching all over the place, it was already in Talmudic times, they're going from all over the places, coming all around, and therefore, it's Eidim Mitzvah L'Kaima, because everyone's going to recognize people's signatures, because they're always going all over around. Now, Borsif was near Bavel, and actually they were not B'nai Torah. As the Gemara says, actually in Sanhedrin Avkov Testament Aleph, the reason why they call Borsif is because it's like a bor, like a pit, Shesafu Meimav, that you actually siphoned off all the water, there's actually nothing left inside of it. So it's actually, if someone brings a get from Borsif, he has to say. But now that their names were changed, if someone brings the get from Bavel, he has to say because it's really Borsif. Someone brings from Borsif, then he doesn't have to say because it's really Bavel. So therefore it's important to know that it's a change of names because it's related to Gitei Nashim. Rashi elsewhere brings that it's because you have to know the name of the city, which Taisa is not possible because Bavel is the name of the country, not the name of the city. But that's the difference of the Gitei Nashim. You have to know what is the place that you have to say B'van Nechlim and where's the place that you don't have to. Now continue Adlocha, the next Mishnah, before we get on to Esrig. So we spoke about already the Lulav, we spoke about the Hadassim, we spoke about the Aravis. So related to that, the Gemara brings the Mishnah brings a Machlokes. Again, like we said, L'kach M'chem B'yim Rishon, Pri Yitzhadu, the Esrig, the Kabbas Tamar, Mizalula, B'anav Yitzhavas, the Hadassim, Avinachal are the Aravis. So we have a Machlokes in the Mishnah. How many of each species do you need to bring? Shmuel Lami, he says, Shleish Hadassim, 3 Hadassim, which the Gemara is in the same, where does he get this from? Where does it say? It says, Anaf Yitzhavas. Where do you find that you have to have that amount? But he says you have to have 3 Hadassim, and Rishtei Haravis, and 2 Aravis, and Lulav Echad, and the Esrig Echad, which is our minig, that we have 3 Hadassim, 2 Aravis, 1 Lulav, and 1 Esrig. Now, he says, however, this is going on the Hadassim, even if 2 of the Hadassim are cut off on the top, it's going to be, as long as the Echad ain't a katim, as long as 1 is not cut off, it's going to be valid. Which is going to ask Manavshach. If cut off is puzzle, so then, and he needs 3, so they all should be intact. If you tell me if cut off is kosher, so then he should allow all 3 cut off. What's this idea of allowing 2 cut off and 1 not? So the Gemara ultimately is going to answer. Rabbi Shmuel actually retracts from his original statement that you need to have 3 Hadassim. And he says that even if 2 of them are cut off, and you're right, the truth is even if you don't even have 2 at all, because really cut off is like it's not there because it's not valid. Even if you have 1 Hadas, it's going to be valid. That's what the Gemara ultimately is going to explain to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Tarfon, he says, he says even if all 3 are cut off, because actually he doesn't require Hadar. The whole reason why cut off is possible is because it's not Hadar. It's still a hadas. Why can't you have, we cut off on the bottom, why can't you cut off on the top? It's not hadar, it's not beautiful. So actually, Reb Tarfon doesn't require hadar on the hadassim. Therefore, all 3 could be cut off on the top. Reb Kiva, he says, Geshem shalulav echad ve'esrik echad. He says, just like there's 1 lulav, and there's 1 esrik, kachadas echad, ba'rava echad, so there's 1 hadas, and there's 1 arava, there's only 1 of each type. Now, Tanya Lina Brisa that elaborates on these opinions, Rabbi Shmuel, the first opinion that was said in the Mishnah was Rabbi Shmuel. He says, it says in the Torah, Pri Eitz Hadar. It's the fruit of the beautiful tree. Pri is singular, that's Echad. So that's 1 Esrig. Kabbas Tamarim. Now, it's read kapos in the plural, but it's written kapas in the singular. It's without a vav, which sounds like echad, that there's only one lulav. And then when it talks about the hadasim, it says anaf, the branch, which is one term. Eitz, wood, is another term. Avos, plated, is another term. Makes, for three terminologies, which Tosfos asks and discuss, don't we use it for other drashas? But shleisha, those are three terminologies telling us the three types of hadasim. Arvei nachal is in the plural. The willows of the brook, that's shtayim, that's two. And vafil shnaim ketumim. This is going on the hadasim again. Although we said you need three hadasim, even if two of them are cut off, one's not cut off, says Rabbi Shmuel, that's going to be valid. Now, Rabbi Tarfon, he says that no, shleisha, you need three hadasim, but shloshim ketumim, even if all three are cut off, again because it doesn't require hadar, are going to be valid. Kivam, he says, as we said in the Mishnah, just like there's one lulav, one esrog, one hadas, and one arava. Now, Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Yachal yehei esrog imohin baguda achas. You would think that the esrog, we know that you bind together the lulav with the aravas and the hadas. You would think you also bind in the esrog with that too. So how many are you going to say no? Because v'chinema prietz hadar v'kapas tamar. Does it say with a vav prietz hadar and kapas tamar, which the vav would sound like that it's and, which is adding to the first thing it mentioned to combine it with the prietz hadar? No. It only says kapas like it's independent, not with the esrog. Now, however, when it continues on to vanaf eitz avos, when it continues onto the hadasim, it says with a vav. When it continues to arav, it says ve'arvei nachal. Oh, they're a vav, so therefore they're connected with the lulav. But the lulav is not connected with the esrog because it doesn't say with the vav, and therefore that's why the esrog is separate from the other three minim. Now, says, and how do we know that each one of the four minim are integral, and if you're missing one of the four, the other three are not a mitzvah? Talmud says in the pasuk ulekachtem, you should take. Now the word ulekachtem could be read shtei lekichatama. It could be a compound word, that it should be a complete taking, which is all four types. And if you're missing any one of them, that's considered lacking. But then the Gemara goes back to the halacha that we started in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, that he says that it's going to be valid when you have two that are cut off and one has to be whole. Where does the pasuk differentiate? And as we had said the question before, we said that manavshach. We said either way you're going to look at it, that how do we understand this? Ishleim and bayi, if it has to be whole because it has to be hadar, it has to be beautiful, the bayi namakula, then all have to be whole. If you don't have to hold this whole, it could be cut, it could be cut off. He doesn't have a problem about hadar. So and even one shouldn't have to be whole. So Amar Bira, which is the name of the sage, Bira was his name. Amar Rabami, he says Chazar by Bishmal. Bishmal retracted from the first part of his statement. He actually validates with one hadas, and that one has to be hadar. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmal, he says halacha grib tarfin, halacha fasik grib tarfin, leniently, that if it's cut off, it's going to be kosher. Meaning grib tarfin, he said that all three could be cut off. You could be cut off on the top, it's going to be kosher. And Ba'az Shmuel Tamei, Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. Shmuel said, Lahanu de mezavne asa, to those who sell the hadasim, he said like this. He says, Ashvu v'zvinu. He says, I want you to even out and sell. Meaning, I don't want you guys to increase the price because everyone's looking for three complete hadasim and you're going to charge them a large amount, aleph hadasim, it's going to be like $100 a hadas. He says, look, even out your prices and sell. And if not, if you're not going to equal it out, I'm going to get up in the beam, I'm going to clap, I'm going to expound like Rabbi Tarfon, who he says, you can have cotton, you can have a cut off on the top. So therefore, make sure you sell for a nice price, or else I'm going to say like Rabbi Tarfon. Now, my time, what's the reason? So, Ilay Mishum the Mekel, if it's because Rabbi Tarfon is the most lenient, in other words, if you want to say he doesn't really hold like Rabbi Tarfon, it's just because he's the most lenient, he was trying to get them, say, I'm going to go like the most lenient interpretation to get you guys to go down, but then religiously Rabbi Kiva to make it tvei. Then they should have darshan like Rabbi Kiva was even more lenient. Because Rabbi Kiva doesn't even require three hadasim. Rabbi Kiva requires only one hadas. So maybe it's not a raya that Shmuel really held like Rabbi Tarfon. Maybe it's because he was just trying to find that the most lenient, but then says the Gemara, no, it can't be like the most lenient, because then he would have said like Rabbi Kiva, which the Gemara rejects the raya and says it's not true. It's not a raya that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Tarfon. Maybe he was just trying to say like the most lenient interpretation, which Tais discusses at length what he say an opinion that it doesn't hold like, but says the Gemara it's not a raya because it's easier to find 3 cut hadasim than chad v'lei katim l'shchech, because one and not cut, which is Rebbe Kiva, even that's not so common. So therefore, it's not a raya. It could be he doesn't hold a grip tafel. It could be he was just trying to say the most lenient interpretation. And I so want to say Rebbe Kiva doesn't even require 3 hadasim. Yeah, it's easier to find 3 cut hadasim than it is to find one that's not cut. Then the halacha, the next Mishnah, finally the fourth of the 4 minim, is esrog, again, which also has many of the similar halachas, but it has which is unique to it, and therefore we say it independently. Esrog hagazel v'hayavish. A stolen and a dried out esrog is pasal, is invalid, as we said in the previous of the dalad minim. Gazel because it's not yours, and yavish because it's not hadar. Shel hasher v'shel nidach is pasal. It's from an asherah, an avodah zarah tree, from the city which has to be burnt because they did avodah zarah, the majority of the inhabitants. It's also pasal again because since it has to be burnt, because like asherah de Moshe, the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's pulverized. It doesn't have the minimum measurement, which all the dalad minim have the minimum measurement. Shel arla, and this is what's unique to that of esrog, that of, and we're going to explain all of these in the Gemara. Shel arla, that which is from the first 3 years of a fruit tree, is pasal. Can now have any benefit from an arla tree. Shel truma timeya, that of truma which is tameh, which you have truma from all types of produce, and esrog is one of them. If it's truma that became tameh, it's going to be pasal. As Gemara is going to explain the reason for that. Shel truma tahira, if it's truma, which like I had an esrog orchard and he has to take off truma and give it to the kohen and star, lo yital. Initially, a person should not use it as the esrog, as the Gemara is going to explain the reason. If not l'kasher, but if he did use it as the esrog of the dalad minim, it's going to be valid. Now, shel demai, what? It doesn't say that, right? Because a kohen could eat, but it doesn't say that that not a kohen can't use it. So and shel demai. And if let's say it's from produce that you bought from the Amma Oretz, so B'Shamay place, B'Shamay say it's invalid. Some Machshir Basil say it's going to be valid, and there's no problem of the fact that it's demai from Amma Oretz, which is a suffix if it's considered as tevel or not. Shamay Sasheni B'Yushalayim. Let's say you have an orchard from Esrogim in California, and now you're taking up your stuff or whatever, wherever you are in Eretz Yisrael, but you bring it up to Yerushalayim, and it's kosher for the consumption of Ma'aser Sheni. So the halacha is lo yito. You're not supposed to take it up and use it as for your esrog. The Gemara is going to explain the reason. If I'm not kosher, but if you did take it, it's going to be kosher because ultimately you could eat that esrog as Ma'aser Sheni, but out of Yerushalayim you can't because it has to be lachem, which is fit for you, that you could use it, and you can't use Ma'aser Sheni out of Yerushalayim. Another halacha, also chazaz sal rubai. Chazazes is like types of these thin boils that when it's all over the majority of the esrog has this like little boils. So that's one problem. Or we're going to say a bunch of different psulim over here. Nitla pit masai, the famous halacha, if let's say the pitim is the top part that grows on top of the esrog. If that fell off, or niklev, let's say the esrog was peeled, or let's say nistik, let's say it was split, or let's say nikah v'chasa kalshu, it has a hole and it's missing a minute amount, which that's one halacha. If it has a hole and it's not missing anything, let's say you stick a needle in and you take it out, it's going to be kasha, as the end of the Mishnah is going to say. But if you make a hole and it's missing, that's possible. All these are going to be invalid. Now, however, the following cases, let's say you have these little boils on the esrog, only on the small amount of the esrog. Or not the uktzai. The uktzai is the other side of the esrog, which is the tail part of the esrog, which is the opposite end, not the part that it grows on. Nika, which grows from the pitim. Nika v'lei chaser kosher. Let's say you have a hole and it's not missing a minute amount; it just has a hole. So kasha, all these cases are going to be kasha by an esrog. Now esrog hakushi, an esrog that comes from Kush, Ethiopia, which is black. Pasal, that's a pasal esrog. Vayar kakarti, that which is green like leek. So that we have machlekes. Rabbi Machshir says it's valid. Rabbi Yehuda says it's invalid. Shir esrog hakatan. The measurement of how small an esrog could be, Rabbi says it has to be at least the size of a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be at least the size of an egg. How big could it be that it shouldn't be bigger than this? Is they could hold 2 in one hand. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yisrael says no, and we pass it like this. Even if it's so big that you could only carry 1 in 2 hands, that's going to be as big that it could be. Thank you to any time for hosting us.